Welcome back, guys. Glad to see you. We have a whole new camera setup, but same crappy lighting. So, today we're going to be talking about Jared Carthalion. Now, he is my new iteration of a Superfriends deck. So, we're going to be relying on our Planeswalkers, trying to close out games. If you guys are long followers of the channel, I've done a Superfriends deck before. That has been almost entirely disassembled and put into this one. So, without further ado, let's talk about some Superfriends and 5 colors. Kicking it off with our commander, Jared Carthalion. He is 5 colors, all of them, white, blue, black, red, green, 5 loyalty Planeswalker. He can be your commander, thanks to his little text at the bottom. His +1 loyalty ability allows him to create a 3/3 Kavu creature token with trample. It also has all 5 colors. His -3 allows us to choose 2 target creatures, and for each of them, we put a +1/+1 counter equal to the number of colors it has. So if we use those 3/3 Kavus as an example, it'll have 5 +1/+1 counters placed on it if you use his -3 ability. Already pretty good. His -6 allows you to return a multicolored card from your graveyard back to your hand. And if it was all colors, you get to draw a card and create 2 treasure tokens. So right here, you can see the other subtype of the deck. We're using as many different colored Planeswalkers as possible to be able to trigger his -6 and return them to our hand. But also his +1 and -3 allow us to use creatures that are multicolored as well to help close out the game. So that's Jared Carthalion in a nutshell. Let's start talking about the deck. If it's a Planeswalker deck, we've got to open up by talking about the Planeswalkers. First up, we have the man himself, Nicol Bolas, Dragon God. He has the loyalty abilities of all other Planeswalkers on the battlefield. He's a multicolored Planeswalker card as well, costing 3 black, a blue, and a red. His +1 can draw a card, and each opponent exiles a card from their hand, or a permanent they control. His -3 destroys a creature or Planeswalker, and his -8 essentially makes any opponent who doesn't control a legendary creature or Planeswalker automatically lose the game. He is one of our big closers, our game enders, right? Works extremely well with one other card that we're going to talk about right now, Aminatou, the Fate Shifter. Aminatou is a very simple 3-color, all multicolors, white, Esper colors, I believe, white, blue, and black, 3 loyalty Planeswalker. The main thing you like to use her for is her -1, which exiles a permanent and then returns it to the battlefield. So it allows you to bounce. With these 2 together, and one sort of ability that allows us to activate loyalty abilities in additional time, we can get infinite mana, right? And just about, depending on the card that we have on the field, almost allow us to kill our opponent, flicker things down to whittle away our opponent's health. We'll talk about what kind of combos we have at the end of the video, but just remember, these guys, they work well together. They like to play catch. The next Planeswalker we got is Ajani. Rest in peace, Ajani, new expansion, right? So, Ajani the Great-Hearted. He is a 4-cost Planeswalker. All your creatures have vigilance, which is pretty good because we are running a number of creatures in this deck, right? +1 grants us 3 life, but our -2 is really what we're looking for. Putting another +1/+1 counter on all our creatures, as well as a loyalty counter on all of our other Planeswalkers. This guy is helping to buff everyone, including our commander. Also coming from the same set as Jared Carthalion, we have, goodness, how do I pronounce her name? I'm not even going to attempt. You know what? The Binder of Wills herself. She is a 4-mana Planeswalker, right? Costing Mardu colors, white, red, and black. She is 5 loyalty. I really like her for this deck. Let's talk about it. Her +2 gives a target legendary creature vigilance, lifelink, and indestructible until your next turn. Very useful in this deck. We can also reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put any number of legendary cards from among them in your hand, and the rest into the graveyard. create a treasure token for each card put in the graveyard this way. So you can just -3, look at the top 4 cards. You can throw them all in the grave and make 4 treasures if that's what you need, right? Because being a 5-color deck, we're gonna need some mana fixing, and she is a huge help for that. The -11 is very hard to get to, but if we can do it, you gain control of all non-land permanents until the end of turn. You untap them and give them haste. Very rarely do I use her -11. We're really looking for her +2, which is fantastic, and her -3 for mana fixing. Good addition in the deck. Next Planeswalker we got, Narset of the Ancient Way. She is a white, blue, red, and 1 generic 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Her +1 gives us 2 life and gives us 1 color in her color identity. But we can only spend it to cast a non-creature spell. That's okay. We're running a bunch of spells in here, and we can use her +1 to give us the mana we need to maybe play our commander again. -2 draws a card and allows us to discard a card. We can then ping something on the field, dealing damage to it, equal to the mana cost of the card we discarded. Her -6, once again, hard to get to, but if you do get it, it's really strong because you get an emblem and allows you to ping 2 damage to any target whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Minskin Boo, we gotta have these guys in here. So he is a 4 mana, 3 loyalty Planeswalker whose colors consist of black and red. When he enters the battlefield, we create a hamster called called Boo. This is Minsk, right? The hamster's a 1/1 and it's red. It has trample and haste. His +1 can put 3 +1/+1 counters on a target creature so long as that creature has trample or haste. Now, if you remember, Minsk has both of those things. But you know what else has trample? The Kavus created from our commander. So Minsk is a huge help for that. We can buff up our Kavus, which have trample, and it'll help swing through. We can also do the -2 of Minsk to sacrifice a creature, and it deals X damage to any target, where X is that creature's power. If it was a hamster, you also draw X cards. So it just rewards you for destroying Minsk, but a nice way to ping down if your partner has a lot of blockers on the field, or there's something you really want to target. His -2, destroying the hamster or the Kavus, is a good way to get through. That is, unfortunately, all the Planeswalkers we're running from this deck. Now, I know what you guys are saying. You're like, wow, Lorenzo, you're only running, what, 6 Planeswalkers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Planeswalkers, counting your commander, and you have the nerve to call this Super Friends? Yes, yes, I do. Right? So, moving on, we're going to move on to the creatures of the deck, which is a lot more, but you're going to see all of them in some way, shape, or form are looking to help our commanders and our Planeswalkers. Let's move on. Continuing on with our creatures, most of them are legendary as well, so you can see there's a lot of themes that we're playing with at the same time. Going off with Jensen Carthalion, not to be confused with the commander himself. He's a Druid Exile. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, scry 1. And if that spell was all colors, you make an angel with flying and vigilance. You can tap him with 5, you need 5 generic to tap him to get Wooburg in return. So he's an excellent mana fixer who goes down for a very low cost of green and white. And it's nice to just have him on hand because a lot of our things, almost all the things in our deck, are multicolored. So we're going to be scrying a lot off of his effect, allowing us to fix the next card that's coming up. A little graveyard touch, right? We have Kethis, the Hidden Hand, white, black, green, 3/4 advisor. Your legendary spells cost 1 less to cast. Fantastic. Like I said, most of the things in our deck are legendary, including our Planeswalkers, right? They're considered legendary cards, so they're going to be costing 1 generic less. His other effect is really the important part. You can exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard to give everything in your graveyard essentially a reborn-like effect. You can cast them from your graveyard for the turn, right? This is really good for getting the important card, maybe your combo piece that you have like almost 99% of it, but one of the cards are already in the graveyard. Playing him allows us to recur that card back to our hand, giving us the game-winning combos that this deck is known for. Very useful. Continuing on with Lae'zel. I really like Lae'zel. Let's talk about her beginning effect. If you would put one or more counters on a creature or planeswalker, you put that many +1. So all of your planeswalkers that enter the battlefield now enter with an additional 1 loyalty. Whenever you're putting a counter on anything, remember we're talking about our commanders -3. We're talking about Minskin Boo's +1/+1 counters. She's giving an additional 1 to any of those type of effects. She's a staple in this deck, and I'm so happy they made her. Glad they made her. This guy is our ultimate mana fixer, the Painbow Elder. Vigilance, and he has +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. We're going to be rocking 5 colors pretty easily, so he's going to be a 5/5, and we can tap him for all 5 of those colors whenever we need it. This guy, fantastic. Since we're rocking so many multicolored cards, it's nice to have the General with us. He has hexproof from monocolored, so your Swords of Plowshares are not touching him. And whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you're making a 4/4 golem on the battlefield. Very nice to have around and just have a passive way to grow. We have another addition to the Jared deck. The Wayfarer right there. He has all colors, but it doesn't affect his color identity. So he is still a green card, but he is known to have all colors in his color identity. This means he'll trigger for anything like the General or any other sort of +1/+1 effect like our Commander, right? Here's the main thing that we want him for. All your multicolored spells have Convoke. Your creatures can help cast any spell that is multicolored by tapping them, and it allows you to pay for 1 mana of that color, right? Or a generic, it doesn't really matter. But this guy is amazing. Keeping him on the field and having multicolored tokens, multicolored creatures, or even planeswalkers, right? Or excuse me, planeswalkers who want to come down, we can use our creatures to help convoke them out, okay? Because your multicolored spells have convoke, right? Moving on, the original Planeswalker Super Friends Commander is making a return in the 99. We have Sisay, the Weatherlight Captain. She gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents. And we can use the Wooburg effect to bring out a legendary permanent so long as its mana cost is less than Sisay's power. Now here's the thing, we're going to be able to buff Sisay very well in this deck, and we're going to be able to search for bigger and bigger things through it. I really like Sisay as a 99 here. Sometimes I like to bounce around and switch out Jared, but after a few reps, I realize that Sisay really should be in the 99, and Jared really is the true Planeswalker commander we've been waiting for. Evolution Sage, just to allow us to populate. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, populate. That means give all your tokens that you want +1, give it an additional +1 counter if it already has +1. Your planeswalkers get an additional +1 to their loyalty. Just an excellent thing to have on the battlefield. We have the Knight of New Aurelia. Each other multicolored creature you control gets +1/+1 for each of its colors. So if you have a 5-color creature on the battlefield, it's getting +5/+5 just by being there and having this card on the field. Another excellent addition. The Sleeper's Scourge. Menace, Mardu, legendary human knight. Other legendary creatures you control have Menace. Whenever you play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, draw a card and lose 1 life. This guy's allowing us to refill our hand just by playing our planeswalkers and our legendary creatures. A huge help to have on the battlefield. And the addition that your legendary creatures have Menace is going to be a big menace to your opponent, right? I really like to have him around. Spark Double, doing Spark Double things. When it enters the battlefield, you can copy a creature or a planeswalker, and it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, or an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. If it isn't legendary, it isn't legendary if that permanent was legendary. Just allowing us to double, allowing us to fix a lot of issues that we may have. Carth the Lion, right? This guy's pretty good. I like having him around on the battlefield. It allows me to fix some issues if my commander just keeps getting focused. Having Carth around really helps me not hurt as much in the long run. So when he enters the battlefield or a Planeswalker dies, you can look at the top 7 cards of your library. Revealing a Planeswalker from among them, you can put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Also, all Planeswalker abilities you activate cost an additional +1 to activate. So even, I don't know, let me grab a random Planeswalker. Here we go. Even Minsk and Boo. So if you do his -2, it would take away his 2 loyalty, but then add 1, right, through his effect, assuming he's on the field, of course, right? So he'll go down to 1, then gain +1, so he'll have 2 loyalty after doing his -1, his -2 effect, okay? So that's Carth, really nice to have. Now we're looking into a Lightning Angel, very simple card, 3-color flying, vigilance, haste. Really nothing else beyond that. But here's the thing, our commander, Minsk, can really buff this up to be a problem, right? Because with our commander, this is getting +3 or 3 +1/+1 counters. Same thing with Minsk. Because it has haste, it will get more counters. The Lightning Angel is a really strong threat for its commander, for its cost, in relation to its cost. Deep Glow Skate. This one is a menace. When it enters, you double each kind of counter on any number of permanents. So when it enters, your 4 loyalty Planeswalker becomes an 8 loyalty Planeswalker. Same thing with any counters you've been putting on your Kavus or anything like that. This thing is a fantastic drop. The Angel of Rebirth is next. Multicolored creatures you control get +1. It has flying. And it's a 5, right? 3, 4, 5 multicolored legendary angel. Whenever you cast another multicolored creature, or excuse me, I misspoke. Whenever another multicolored creature you control dies, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So what it's doing is it's allowing you to recur things from the graveyard, potentially casting them again. So if your multicolored creature dies, like your Lightning Angel, it pops back to your hand and you're able to cast it again. Very nice to have. Next, I'm running Garth One-Eyed because I'm talking, like, we're getting to 5-color cards. And remember, our commander very much likes having multicolored cards in their identity. So Garth One-Eye is pretty useful. He's a 5/5 for 5 colors. You can tap him to create some very strong cards, right? Things like Black Lotus, Shivan Dragon, Regrowth, Brain Geyser, Disenchant. These are all very good things that you can tap him to give a copy of it to your hand, right? And you may cast a copy, right? Very useful thing. You can only do each of those effects once, though, so long as he's on the field. Obviously, if you flicker him or anything like that, you can use it. You can get like a bunch of Black Lotus out of it. I like having Garth as more of a utility. In the long run, though, I'm probably going to remove him. He might be one of the first cards cut if I ever make upgrades to this deck. Simply because his utility is great, but it's really hard to have him stick around for a full turn to get that effect off. But Garth is nice to have for now. Moving on to the Maelstrom Angel, the card that should be a legendary card, but it's not. 5-color, 5/5 Angel. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. Doesn't matter what the spell is, you're casting it for free once she swings in. The fact that she flies also is a huge problem to deal with. We're in the final 3 cards now. Jodah the Unifier. We're running a lot of multicolored cards. A lot of those cards are even legendary. So Jodah is a huge boon to this deck. Legendary creatures you control get +X+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. So Jodah enters the battlefield, all your legendary creatures are getting +1/+1 because he counts himself as well. Whenever you cast a legendary creature while this is on the field, and so long as you cast it from your hand, you're almost getting a cascade effect until you find a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value, and then you could cast it without paying its mana cost. So you have Jodo on the field, you cast any legendary card, and then he could start cascading for something of lesser mana value. Very, very useful. Jodo is a fantastic, almost broken card, but we know that's the state of modern Wizards. So, moving on to the Two-Headed Hellkite. Another 5 mana card, Menace, Flying, and Haste. Whenever it attacks, draw 2 cards. So he comes down and is giving you a 2-card restock to your hand. He has Flying and Menace, so more than likely he's probably getting through to your opponent, so he'll be able to stick around and do this a number of times. Really good guy to have. You know, though, if we're running a Planeswalker counter or a +1/+1 counter style deck, there's gotta be a doubling season. Now, unfortunately, I am too poor to own a doubling season, but I can definitely have the next best thing. Vorinclex, the Monstrous Raider. 6 mana, 6/6. He's only green in his identity, though, which kind of sucks. But he has Trample and Haste, and if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put double that many of each of those counters on that permanent or player instead. So if he's on the field and you cast, I don't know, your commander, sure, and you cast your commander, the commander's entering with 10 loyalty counters as opposed to his 5. This allows us to immediately start ultimating some of our most powerful cards. I remember I popped off with a combo, dropping Nicol Bolas and immediately ulting him for game because our opponent didn't have a legendary creature to stop this effect. Vorinclex, fantastic card, and I'm still happy to see that your price is kind of okay. That's the last creature in our deck, though. Let's move on to other types of permanents we're going to see, our enchantments. We are running a respectable amount of enchantments. First up, we're going to look at Font of Fertility, just a mana fixing, allowing us to get a basic land card onto the battlefield. Oath of Nissa is great. This allows us to spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast Planeswalker spells. So, having someone like Nicol Bolas who needs 3 black, we can easily get Wooburg most times, but getting 3 specific black colors is kind of annoying. It's nice to have Oath of Nissa around to help fix that. Her other effect allows as it enters the battlefield to look at the top 3 cards of your library, and you can reveal a creature, land, or planeswalker from among them to put it into your hand. Just a nice little effect, but the main thing we want her for is the other side, the under effect. Widespread Thieving is our next enchantment. 3 mana, Hideaway 5. So when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library and put one of them face down and the rest at the bottom of your library. Now, from this point forward, whenever this card is on the field, whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you get a treasure token. And then, if you have Wooburg, you may pay Wooburg. If you do, you can cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So you're pretty much always going to have Wooburg. You'll be able to play a card, so long as it has multicolor. You'll get a free treasure, and if you spend your Wooburg, you can cast whatever you've exiled onto the battlefield. This is a really nice, sneaky card to hide away. Sometimes I like to bait out my opponent's removal by playing this and putting just like a garbage land or something underneath, right? So that they're like, oh, I want to prevent you from having that card, and they blow up this enchantment. And I'm like, all right, great, thanks. You stopped me from getting this useless land, right? And then, like, they wasted a removal that I can now start following up with other things like my Broker's Ascendancy. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control. I don't know who was thinking about designs for this card, but whoever you are, thank you so much. I needed more planeswalker support, and Broker's Ascendancy is exactly what I needed. Just having it on the field and ending your turn buffs your planeswalkers and your creatures. For 3 mana, yes, please. This next card, Mana Cannon, is a menace in this deck. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, deal X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors that spell is. This deck is running a lot of 5-color cards. So when it enters the battle, when we cast a 5-color card, this thing is dealing 5 damage to whatever we want. A lot of other cards, like Broker's Ascendancy, only 3 colors, still 3 damage to whatever we want. This thing is just pinging the board, pinging your opponent's face, being extremely annoying for your opponent to deal with. I love Mana Cannons. Alright, sorry about that. Just bumped into the camera. Whoops. Next card that we have as an enchantment is Spirit of Resistance. 3 mana. If you control a permanent of each color, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. We have a lot of 5-color cards, right? That means while this is on the field, if we control a card that is 5 colors, or if the colors of what we have on the field eventually add up to be 5 colors, we're no longer able to take damage, right? Spirit of Resistance just says no to it, which is amazing. Great defensive tool to have on the field, and a must include to almost bait out our opponent's removal, right? Oath of Kaya is the next permanent. This is one of our game enders here. When it enters the battlefield, you can deal 3 damage to any target and gain 3 life. This also disincentivizes your opponent from attacking our planeswalkers, right? If they do, it deals 2 damage to that player and you gain 2 life. I like Oath of Kaya in here because it allows us to do the weird flicker shenanigans with things like Nicol Bolas, Spark Double, and Amanatu, right? Like these guys, bam bam, flickering each other and flickering her while we're doing it. But Oath of Kaya is really useful to disincentivize, and it's really cheap for what it does. That's why I like having it in. The Oath of Teferi must include for any Super Friends decks, right? When it enters the battlefield, you exile a permanent and return it to the battlefield at the end step, so you have to flicker something you own. But his effect is amazing. You may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control twice each turn, rather than once. So now our planeswalkers can trigger 2 times. Very nice include, and he is one of the cards with this type of effect, where you activate planeswalker abilities with additional time, is the things that you want to keep an eye out for to get weird flicker shenanigans like Amanatu and Nicol Bolas, right? Along with Oath of Oath of Kaya, right? That's where it all comes together. 2 more enchantments. Technically, they're not really enchantments. Prismatic Bridge. We really always want to get the Prismatic Bridge down if possible. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put it on the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Just a way to start throwing cards, planeswalkers, creatures onto the battlefield and almost overwhelming your opponent with sheer force. Now the reason I say it's almost like a creature, or it's almost like an enchantment, is because it's really a creature on the backside. Eska, God of the Tree. Rest in peace, Eska. 3 mana, 1/4 God. You can tap her to add 1 mana of any color. Now here's the effect that I really like about her too. Other legendary creatures can also be tapped for 1 mana of any color, and they also gain vigilance. So now your legendary creatures can swing out without having to be tapped, and then you can tap them for mana whenever you need it, and that mana can be 1 mana of any color. Really great card. So most times I'm always going for the Prismatic Bridge, but if I'm behind on mana and I need some fixing, Eska is where it's at. The last enchantment, quote unquote, card we have is the Kami War. 5-color enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls. At your next upkeep, you can return 1 other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, so you can bounce 1 card and then force each opponent to discard a card. And at the upkeep after that, so after 3 turns this has been on the battlefield, you exile this card to turn it back into a creature, which is a 6/6 dragon spirit. It has all colors, it's flying and trample, and whenever it attacks, defending player chooses a card in your graveyard, allows you to add that card to your hand, and it gets +X attack, where X is that card's mana value. So it forces your opponent to allow you to recurse something from your grave, and it buffs its own attack. Flying and trample's also really annoying to deal with, and it being all colors is going to make sure it gets buffed heavily from Jared, our commander. That's the last enchantment of the deck, but we're not done with permanents. We're going to finish off with our artifacts. Moving on to artifacts, we have Wayfarer's Bauble. Everyone knows Wayfarer's Bauble. You gotta have it in a commander game. Soul Ring, of course. And even you gotta throw in your Felwar Stone. Arcane Signet, right? Those are the core staples. You know, you gotta have those. Now, we have a few more. We have Chromatic Lantern, right? Lets you make all your lands have tap, add 1 mana of any color. You got your Relic of Legends now. Now we're getting a little trickier. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, but you can also tap an untapped legendary creature to also give you mana. We're running a lot of legendary cards in this deck, legendary creatures specifically, so tapping them down to allow us to fix our mana is definitely a good addition. We're also going to be running Timeless Lotus. Now, I know this is money, right? I just found some money when I opened the box, and I got really lucky. But I'm going to be using my Timeless Lotus. It's a 5 generic legendary artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, but after that, it can always be tapped to give you 5 mana. Wooburg, right? Very good card. I love it. We're also running a Tome of the Guild pack. Whenever you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card, and then you could tap it to add 1 mana of any color. That's some more mana fixing, and giving us some card advantage does kind of make up for the fact that it's a 5 mana card. The last mana fixing like card we have is Chromatic Orrery. 7 mana, it can be tapped for 5, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. We never use its 5 generic effect, but there's some times where you could refill your hand with it. I really use it just for the fact that it fixes my mana. Talking about the last 3 artifacts we got, the Chain Veil. Another staple card if you want to run Planeswalkers, right? At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability of a Planeswalker, you lose 2 life. So, big risk for not having Planeswalkers on the field with this card up. But for 4 mana, you can activate your Planeswalker abilities another time, an additional time. This does stack with things like Oath of Teferi, because now you'll be able to activate, assuming you spend the 4 to tap this, you can activate Planeswalker abilities 3 times, right? The original time, plus the Chain Veil, plus Oath of Teferi. So you'll be able to activate 3 times with all of your pieces moving at the same time. Excellent card. We need to have more win cons in the deck, so I've opted for the Door of Nothingness. It's very easy for us to get double Wooburg in this deck. It's also a really nice just bait out your opponent's removal cards with this. Your opponent sees it, the first thing they want to do is try to get rid of it because they know you have the potential of killing them instantly. It enters the battlefield tapped, for those of you who don't know, and if you spend double Wooburg, so double white, double blue, double black, double red, double green, you can tap this, sacrifice it, and make a single player lose the game. Very good in a one-on-one matchup, and it's a nice way to kind of tie out and just remove the biggest threat. Maybe someone's got a Blightsteel Colossus, and you're like, yeah, no, you're dead now. Okay? The last artifact we're running is Luxor's Gift. Well, Luxor the Gift, right? This card, honestly, when I first got it, I could not find a way to put it in my original Super Friends. But once I remade my Super Friends deck into this new iteration, Luxor has been coming in clinch so many times. What it does is the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. So remember this. Let's use your commander's Kavus, for example. Let's say you've buffed them. They already have 5+1/+1 counters. Equipping a Kavu with this sword will give them an additional +5/+5 on top of the 5+1/+1 counters. So making them extremely strong opponents to hit. You can also use this on your Planeswalkers to stop your opponents from targeting them with attacks, right? Because it removes the Planeswalker type on your Planeswalker. So now it just becomes a normal creature having attack and health equal to its loyalty counters. You can equip the Planeswalker for 1 and equip a generic creature for 3. That's all the artifacts I have. It's time to move into the spells. Big surprise here, if you're running a 5-color deck, you're going to need to lean heavy into your ramp. I got Rampant Growth, Farseek, Grow from Ashes, Cultivate, Harrow, and Search for Tomorrow. That's not even all my ramp. You guys have seen much earlier that we had a lot more stuff, but that's the ramp spells that we're running. Moving on though, let's talk about some removals. You got your Path Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Despark, and Merciless Eviction, right? Just a nice engine to single target remove those annoying pieces that your opponents are rocking and deal with issues that as they come up. Now for protection, we are running a couple good protection spells. We got Semester's End, one card that I don't really see a lot of people use. Exile any number of creatures or planeswalkers you control for 4 mana. And at the beginning of the next end step, return them to the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker. I use this if someone's swinging out against my planeswalkers, trying to kill them because they see I have pieces of like a combo on board and they're trying to remove it as quickly as possible. Semester's End is a good way to prevent that. One more piece of protection, Teferi's protection. I know, more money, but I got it as part of a secret rare, so you know that makes it okay. Until your next turn, your life total can't change. You gain protection from everything, and all permanents you control phase out. For only 3 mana, a extremely good card. We need more reprints of Teferi's protection, honestly. Okay, so that's the protection engine. We are running a small proliferate engine. Continuous Plan for 2 mana. It allows us to proliferate, add counters of, you know, whatever counter type we have, and draw a card. Pretty good for 2 mana. Steady Progress is just another one of those. You proliferate, then you draw a card. And then we have Tezzeret's Gambit. It can be paid with Phyrexian Blue and 3 generic. You draw 2 cards and then proliferate. So you can see we have a way to give us some card advantage and proliferate things we have on board. Now we have some 5-color spells. Opening up with Indri's Maelstrom. Oh, excuse me. Iriden's Maelstrom. 5 Wooburg. Destroy each creature that isn't all colors. Just a big board wipe to anyone who essentially isn't running 5-color cards like us. Okay? You have to be careful though. Some of our creatures do not fall into the 5-color category. A lot of them actually. And they are going to die too. So you have to be careful with this one when you throw it out. Unite the Coalition is one of my new favorites. 5 mana and 2 generic, Wooburg and 2 generic. You can choose 5, and you can choose the same thing multiple times. So you can phase out permanents, you can have a player draw a card, you can exile specific cards in a player's graveyard, you can deal 2 damage to any target, or you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. And you can choose 5 from this multiple times. This is an extremely utility card, and I love to have it on the battlefield. The last card we're rocking is Conflux. This is Wooburg and 3 generic. You can search your library for a white card, so a card that has white in it, a card that has blue, a card that has black, a card that has red, and a card that has green. You show them off and then put them in your hand. Make sure to shuffle your library at the end. This is just I'm going to play this and get all my combo pieces to my hand and try to get game next turn, right? You are showing your opponent that you now have game in hand, so you have to be careful when you play it. Kind of play it if you have protections already, or if you're confident that your opponent can't remove you next turn, right? Or before your next turn. Conflux is an extremely good card, but a little on the expensive side. Alright, that's the sorceries. It's time to finish off this thing with some lands. As we move into lands, let's talk about the core pieces. You know, you gotta have your command tower. An exotic orchard is always great. Now, for this specific type of deck, I am running a City of Brass. When it becomes tapped, you take 1 damage, but you can always tap it to give you 1 mana of any color. I also have the World Tree in here. We're going to have a lot of different lands in here, and eventually we're going to get 6. If we do, we have ultimate mana fixing, because now all of our lands can be tapped for any color. We never used the double Wooburg effect on bottom, just so you guys are aware, but it's really nice to have for Eska, I guess, right? And the last one we have is the Plaza of Heroes, a newer card. You can tap it for generic, add 1 mana of any color, and spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell. Most of our cards are legendary, including our Planeswalkers, so it's pretty useful. You add 1 mana of any color from among legendary permanents you control, so if you have your Planeswalker commander out, you can tap it for any color. And for 3 generic and exiling this card, target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Never really used that last part, but those first 2 taps are extremely useful to have. I really like the Plaza of Heroes, right? Continuing on, those can be tapped for any color. Let's talk about some utilities. Utility lands that we have. We have Interplanetary Beacon, very useful for Planeswalker tribals. When you cast a Planeswalker, you gain 1 life. It can be tapped for a generic. And you can filter mana through this. So for 1 mana and tapping it, you gain 2 different colored manas. Spend this only on Planeswalkers. Very nice. If we're rocking Planeswalkers, you know we gotta have the Forge of Heroes. You tap it for a generic, or you can tap it to target your commander that entered the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, and a +1/+1, or excuse me, a 1 loyalty counter if it's a Planeswalker. Right? Very nice to have. Karn's Bastion is our last quote-unquote utility land. It's a land that enters, you can tap it for a generic, or 4 to proliferate. Extremely useful to have. Some sacrifice lands to help us search what we need. We have Evolving Wilds, Terrapomorphic Expanse, Windswept Hearth, Marsh Flats are all of the tap to sacrifice search for a land that you need. I also have some dual lands in here. Let's talk about them. Not the super expensive ones, just the you know, your generic Caves, Prairie Stream, Canopy Vista, Cinderglade, Smolder Marsh, Sunken Hollow, and whatever the hell that first word is, Coast. Now we have one more non-basic land in this, but technically it is a basic land, so this Bosk, Murmuring Bosk. It's a forest. It can be tapped for a green. When it enters the battlefield, reveal a Tree Folk card from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped. So, It can be tapped for a green, it can be tapped for a white, it can also be tapped for a black. But if you tap it for a white or black, you take 1 damage. We only have 1 Tree Folk in this deck, so getting this entering the battlefield untapped is kind of hard. But there has been games when I'm like, oh, look at that, I'm going to play this untapped because I have my Tree Folk, right? And everyone's like, oh my goodness, 1 Tree Folk and you got him. And I'm like, yes, I did. That's all of our non-basics. Let's talk about what we got. We're running 4 forest, 3 plains, 3 islands, 2 mountains, and 2 swamps. That is all of the cards of the deck. Let's talk about our closing thoughts. You guys want to see something crazy? So this video has been done in 2 parts, both in 2 different days. Look at how much my commander, Jared, has warped in just the 24 hours I left him out of his box or out of his sleeve, because he's usually sleeved. I don't know if you guys can see that too well, but the pringling on this is crazy. Like, geez. I pulled him out of his sleeve for 1 day. Anyway, let's go into the closing thoughts. So, closing thoughts on Jared Carthalion. This deck is running a lot of themes, a lot of different themes. We're running Super Friends. We're running 5-color. We're running +1/+1 counters. We're running, what else is in here? We're running a Legendary Tribal. We're running a Proliferate engine. We're running a Protection engine. We're running all of these different things, and they kind of combo well together. Now, I made this deck, and I wanted to, and hopefully, as of the recording of this deck, Phyrexia All Will Be One is about like a week or 2 away. So that just gives you an idea of what kind of backlog I'm working with here. But I expect this deck is going to be upgraded soon, because that expansion, Phyrexia All Will Be One, is running a lot of good proliferates, as well as different colored commanders, or excuse me, different colored planeswalkers that I do want to add in this deck. So expect another update video at a later time, but this is the first look at Jared Carthalion. Thanks so much for checking me out, checking us out. If you liked the video, like the video, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.